The reception landline rang nonstop, but no one answered. Before the sound became too annoying, Jasmine hesitantly picked up the phone. On the other end of the line, a voice spoke rapidly in Dutch. Without thinking twice, Jasmine responded with impeccable fluency, her perfect pronunciation surprising even herself. The entire lobby seemed to freeze. Some guests raised their eyebrows, others exchanged curious glances. Even billionaire Charles Whitman, the hotel's owner, interrupted his conversation to observe. The invisible chambermaid had just revealed something no one expected. The lobby of Chicago's Empire Grand Hotel oozed luxury. Affluent guests milled about among crystal chandeliers and red carpets, while discreet housekeepers passed by almost invisibly. In the corner, Jasmine Carter, in a simple uniform and with a light step, wheeled a cleaning cart. She calmly hung up the phone and returned to work, as if nothing had happened. But the fixed eyes of the customers and staff betrayed the change. The contrast between the guests' glow and the cleaning bucket now seemed small in the face of this. An extraordinary talent had revealed itself, breaking the barrier of invisibility. The next day, the billionaire asked to see her. The morning after the incident in the lobby, Jasmine was called into manager Karen Miller's office. The woman, with a stern face and a sharp voice, didn't seem at all pleased. "Who do you think you are answering the phone at the front desk?" she snapped. Jasmine tried to explain, but her words were cut off. To Karen, it didn't matter whether she had solved the problem. It only mattered that a chambermaid didn't know her place. The punishment came swiftly and cruelly. Karen demoted Jasmine to the most humiliating role, managing the bathrooms at the convention center where hundreds of visitors would pass through every day. "Maybe that way you'll learn," she said with a cold smile. Jasmine left silently, but inside she felt as if acid were burning her insides. There was no logic, just pure, naked injustice. In the small apartment where she lived alone, the young woman wept silently that night. She remembered how many times she had seen white receptionists answer phones without ever being punished. For them, it was initiative. For her, it was insolence. The contrast was as stark as the emptiness of the room she was sinking into. Yet, amidst her tears, a spark of hope persisted. Across town, Charles Whitman couldn't forget the scene in the I's lobby. The billionaire had seen something rare, pure talent in someone society considered invisible. As he leafed through reports and signed million-dollar contracts, his mind returned to that chambermaid who spoke Dutch like a diplomat. Who was Jasmine Carter? And why did she work hidden behind a cleaning cart? The dilemma was posed. On one side, an employee who seemed destined for invisibility, suffocated by prejudice and injustice. On the other, a system that kept her confined to cleaning, despite her extraordinary gifts. The line between dignity and submission narrowed with each step, and in Jasmine's heart, a question echoed. How much longer could she endure being invisible? But fate wouldn't wait long. The call in Dutch wouldn't be forgotten, and the injustice she suffered wouldn't be the last. The next day, while Jasmine was still trying to recover from the humiliation, her name came up on the hotel's executive floor, and a simple call would change everything. What no one at that hotel knew was that this connection would change not only Jasmine's life, but the entire industry. Karen Miller's office had walls adorned with management certificates and a spotless mahogany desk, but the atmosphere was intimidating. Jasmine entered with hesitant steps, still carrying the smell of the disinfectant she used in the hallways. Karen didn't invite her to sit down. "You embarrassed the hotel yesterday, Jasmine. You answered a call that wasn't your job. The Empire Grand is no place for antics from employees who don't know how to behave." Her voice was like ice cutting through skin. Jasmine tried to explain. No one was answering, and the guest needed help. But Karen held up her hand, interrupting. "I don't need your apologies. I need compliance. Housekeepers clean. Period." Those words struck like a hammer blow to her dignity. The contrast was clear. For Karen, initiative in a black employee was considered insolent, while in white receptionist, it was praised as proactivity. The punishment came quickly, with no room for appeal. Karen opened the drawer, took out a form, and signed with exaggerated force. "Starting today, You're being transferred to the convention center restrooms. It's a busy area. Maybe this way you'll learn to stay quiet and do only what you're told." Jasmine swallowed, feeling her eyes well up, but she remained standing. She wouldn't give Karen the pleasure of seeing her cry. That night, alone in her small apartment, the masked strength slipped. Sitting on her narrow bed, Jasmine wept silently, muffling the sound so as not to disturb the neighbors. Her hands trembled as she remembered the humiliation in the office. She thought of the receptionists she had so often seen answer calls without a problem. Why was it acceptable for them? But for her, it was grounds for demotion. The answer hurt more than the punishment. Race and class determined her fate. But as tears flowed, something inside her resisted. The scene in the hotel lobby still echoed. The surprised looks, Charles Whitman's attention, and the strange feeling that, for a brief moment, she had ceased to be invisible. Jasmine didn't know it, but the night of pain was also the preparation for her turnaround. In that tearful morning, she still didn't know that the next day she would be called to cross the doors that had always been closed to her. The next morning, Jasmine was at the convention center, quietly cleaning one of the bathrooms, when she heard her name called over the internal speaker. Her heart raced. Never before had a housekeeper been called that way. "Please report to the 35th floor, executive lounge." She quickly wiped her hands on her uniform and, oblivious, followed the glass elevator. Each floor up was like passing through layers of a forbidden world. The 35th floor was unfamiliar territory for the cleaning staff. Thick carpeting, modern art, and a respectful silence marked the space. Jasmine walked unsteadily, feeling the receptionist's gazes scrutinize her as if she'd trespassed on sacred ground. She stopped before the door with gold plaques. "Charles Whitman, Presidente do Empire Grand Hotels." He took a deep breath before entering, trying to contain his nervousness. Inside, the billionaire was waiting for her. Charles Whitman was a man of imposing presence, with well-combed silver hair and the sharp gaze of someone accustomed to ruling empires. However, when he saw her, he gave a slight, curious smile. "Are you Jasmine Carter?" She nodded, unsure of what to expect. He stood, walked over to her, and said, "I want to thank you for what you did yesterday. Your fluency in Dutch saved us an important negotiation." Jasmine could hardly believe what she was hearing. To her, it had been merely an instinctive gesture, but to the billionaire, it held enormous value. Whitman motioned, and an HR analyst entered with a folder. "I asked for your resume. I read every detail. How many languages do you speak?" Jasmine, in a low voice, replied, 7. Silence followed, but it was a silence of admiration, not contempt. The billionaire watched her as if he had found a diamond hidden in the dust. He then paused, as if preparing a revelation. "I'm organizing an international event here at the hotel. I need someone trustworthy, someone with a real talent for dealing with foreign delegations. I want to know if you'd be willing to take on a different role for a few days." Jasmine, surprised, felt her heart pound. The chambermaid had crossed the forbidden doors, and on the other side, the impossible seemed to begin to become real. Charles Whitman leaned back in his leather chair and folded his hands on the table. "Jasmine, I want you to act as my international relations coordinator during the conference. It will be temporary, but with great responsibility." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "But, sir, I'm just a chambermaid." He smiled slightly. "You're not just nothing. You speak 7 languages. That's more than many who earn fortunes here." The proposal seemed like a distant dream. Whitman detailed it: a salary of $5,000 a week, unrestricted access to executive suites, and direct contact with foreign delegations. Jasmine almost gasped. For years she had cleaned rooms in silence, earning little more than $1,000 a month. Now, in the blink of an eye, life was opening like a door she had never dared push. It was as if she had found an invisible key that had always been in her pocket. The billionaire handed him a new badge with a photo, name, and the provisional title of International Coordinator. Jasmine held the card like a trophy. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, but from suppressed pride. As she pinned it to her uniform, she realized her identity could no longer be erased. Here was a chance to finally show what she carried inside. Taking the elevator down, she walked back through the hotel corridors. The looks on her face were mixed. Some employees stared at her silently. Others whispered. As she turned the corner, she ran into Karen Miller. The manager stopped, examined her name tag, and frowned. "What does this mean?" Jasmine took a deep breath and, with a slight smile, replied, "It means I don't just clean rooms now. I represent this hotel." It was like an invisible punch to Karen's vanity. As she walked steadily through the lobby, Jasmine felt her feet touch the ground differently. She was no longer the invisible chambermaid who walked with her head down. She was a woman carrying the weight of newly regained dignity. She didn't know it yet, but that badge would be more than a temporary promotion. It would be the key to overturning an entire system of injustice. On her first day as coordinator, Jasmine was taken to Human Resources to streamline processes. There she met Olivia Brooks, a young, fast-talking analyst with an observant eye. As they discussed the conference's demands, Olivia lowered her voice and said, "Did you notice anything strange about the translation contracts? Because I did." Jasmine was intrigued. Until then, she hadn't paid attention to administrative paperwork, but there was something in Olivia's tone that suggested danger. Together, they began reviewing documents. Jasmine, with her language expertise, identified gross errors in the translations, mistakes a true professional would never make. Olivia confirmed that these contracts came from a company linked to the niece of David Thompson, the powerful COO. "They charge a fortune for mediocre work," she explained. It was like finding a spider's web hidden behind the hotel's luxurious upholstery, and each thread led to the heart of the corruption. The more Jasmine read, the more she revolted. She remembered the punishment she had received for answering a simple phone, while white executives embezzled millions without ever being questioned. The contrast was unbearable. They punish talent and reward fraud, she thought. The acid of injustice burned again, but now accompanied by an intense desire to expose the truth. It wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been silenced. For years, that night in her apartment, Jasmine spread copies of the reports on the table. She read them in Mandarin, Spanish, French, and Dutch, and found flaws in them all. There was no doubt the translations were purposefully poor to justify inflated contracts. The words sounded like poorly diluted poison, but she could transform them into clean water, into irrefutable proof. With each revised page, the house of cards Thompson had built trembled. The day of the conference approached, and Jasmine knew that the diplomatic blunders about to occur could cause an international disaster. Only she had the knowledge to prevent it. That night, Jasmine realized she wasn't just getting a temporary promotion. She was about to take on the corrupt system that kept so many invisible and expose it for all to see. The main hall of the Empire Grand was prepared for the international conference. Flags from over 20 countries decorated the room, and hired translators scurried around with headsets on. Jasmine, now with her badge shining on her chest, observed every detail. In her hands rested the final documents that would be delivered to the delegation. A first reading was enough to send a chill down my spine, glaring errors in Mandarin that could turn a cooperation agreement into a diplomatic insult. Without hesitation, he sat down at the table and began to revise it line by line. What had been written as alliance of mutual respect had been translated as alliance of submission. A disaster, if read in front of the Chinese representatives. Jasmine quickly corrected, scribbling notes and rewriting terms precisely. It was like pouring clean water into bowls that had been poisoned. Each word adjusted was a step toward preventing the entire event from falling apart. Meanwhile, Olivia watched in awe. "You just saved this hotel from an international crisis," she murmured, almost in disbelief. Jasmine, focused, didn't respond. She knew she couldn't make a mistake. The foreign representatives began arriving, folders open and translators at their sides. Jasmine handed over the revised documents firmly, smiling discreetly. And when they heard the correct texts in their languages, the diplomats nodded in satisfaction. From the corner of the room, Charles Whitman watched everything. His eyes were attentive, absorbing every detail. The scene was clear. While high-ranking directors hid behind inflated contracts, it was a young chambermaid who prevented the catastrophe. He said nothing, but in his mind, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. There was more than talent in Jasmine. There was integrity, courage and strategic intelligence. When the session ended without incident, the audience breathed a sigh of relief. But Jasmine knew this was just the beginning. Correcting papers was just the surface. She'd already seen too much in the reports. Suspicious emails, abusive amounts, repeated errors. At that conference, Jasmine not only proved her worth, she lit the fuse that would bring down an entire system. And the next step would be inevitable: direct confrontation. The morning after the conference, Jasmine walked down the executive corridor with a briefcase full of documents. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from responsibility. Each sheet was a bomb ready to blow up the castle of privilege within the Empire Grand. Entering Charles Whitman's office, she took a deep breath and placed the briefcase on the desk. "You must see this, sir." Her voice was firm, but heavy, with the weight of years of swallowing injustice. Whitman frowned and opened the reports. Page after page, he found glaring errors, inflated receipts, and approval signatures, always linked to the same name: David Thompson. Jasmine watched every reaction, every stifled sigh. "These contracts aren't just incompetence, they're fraud," he explained. And then, as if pulling out the final piece of a puzzle, he showed the emails that proved nepotism. Thompson's niece's company was receiving millions for flawed translation. The billionaire leaned back in his chair, silent for a few seconds. He wasn't just facing a financial scandal, but a scheme that was eroding the credibility of his own hotel chain. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked. Jasmine nodded. "It means it's not just about me, or about yesterday. It's about everyone who was rejected, ignored, and punished because someone decided they were worthless." His words echoed like hammer blows in the room. As she spoke, Olivia Brooks entered with new reports. "Mr. Whitman, we've cross-referenced admissions data from the last 5 years. There's a clear pattern of minorities being rejected for senior positions." She placed the papers next to Jasmine's folder. The room felt heavier with each revelation. Thompson and Karen's house of cards was crumbling before its owners. Whitman took a deep breath, stood, and stared out the window. Chicago view. Then he made the decision that would change everything. He turned to Jasmine and Olivia and said, "Get ready. This won't be resolved quietly. We're going to take this to the board." The house of cards was beginning to crumble, and the next step wouldn't be a private conversation. It would be a public revelation that no one in that hotel would ever forget. The main auditorium of the Empire Grand was packed that morning. Directors, managers, and key staff had been summoned to an emergency meeting. No one knew exactly why, but the atmosphere was tense. Charles Whitman took the stage with a solemn demeanor. Behind him, a giant screen displayed charts and reports prepared the night before. Beside him, Jasmine and Olivia waited silently, clutching folders containing the evidence. Whitman began his speech calmly but forcefully. "In recent years, our hotel has invested millions in translation and international communication services. However, what was supposed to guarantee excellence has turned into a scheme of corruption and discrimination." Murmurs spread through the audience. Then, with a click, data began to appear on the screen: glaring errors, inflated prices, and contracts. Repeatedly approved by director David Thompson, Karen Miller, sitting in the front row, paled. Thompson crossed his arms, trying to maintain his composure, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. Whitman continued, "And it doesn't stop there. As we analyze admissions and promotions, we uncover a pattern of systematic rejection against minorities. Talent has been stifled, opportunities have been denied, and voices have been silenced." Each sentence was like a hammer smashing through the walls of the system. The audience stirred in shock. It was then that Whitman called Jasmine to the stage. The invisible chambermaid, now wearing her coordinator badge, came up to timid applause that soon grew. This young woman prevented a diplomatic disaster and exposed the scheme that was corroding our hotel from within, the billionaire announced. Thompson stood up furiously. "This is a sham." But Whitman retorted firmly, "Sham is stealing millions while accusing innocents of not knowing their place." The auditorium erupted in murmurs of disapproval. Karen tried to intervene, saying she was just following orders, but it was too late. The curtain had been torn in front of everyone. There were no more excuses, nowhere to hide. Whitman closed his speech with a firm voice. "Starting today, transparency and merit will guide this hotel, and to prove it, I now announce the surprising promotion of Jasmine Carter. The audience, incredulous, broke into a standing ovation. The invisible chambermaid was about to become a symbol of transformation. The announcement of the promotion crashed like a wave over the auditorium. Jasmine, her simple badge still pinned to her chest, could hardly believe her ears. Charles Whitman had appointed her Global Director of Internal Communications, a position she would never have dared dream of. The applause, once timid, grew into a standing ovation. Employees who had previously seen her merely as a chambermaid now hailed her as a leader. It was the triumph of someone who had overcome not only professional, but also social barriers. In the hotel hallways, the news spread like wildfire. Housekeeping staff, restaurants, maintenance staff, everyone smiled at the mention of Jasmine's name. Many came up to her with tears in their eyes, thanking her for proving that the invisible could also be seen. When her cleaning colleagues applauded her in the lobby, she was moved. For the first time, those simple uniforms carried not shame, but pride. Dignity was collective. Meanwhile, Thompson and Karen saw their masks slip. Thompson was immediately dismissed, and rumors swirled that he would be demoted to managing a rundown motel in Nevada. Karen was transferred to the laundry department at a distant branch, far from the spotlight. The consequences weren't just punishments, they were symbols that the system could no longer sustain itself. The empire of privilege was beginning to crumble. In her new glass-enclosed office overlooking Manhattan, Jasmine worked tirelessly. She wasn't limited to her executive role. She launched the Invisible Talents, designed to identify and promote employees overlooked by prejudice. Within a few months, dozens of workers were elevated to prominent positions. Receptionists, waiters, and drivers demonstrated talents previously stifled. The change wasn't just hers. It was everyone. And in every meeting, in every speech, Jasmine made a point of remembering her roots. True justice isn't just about punishing those who discriminate. It's about rebuilding systems so that prejudice has nowhere to hide. Her words echoed through the Empire Grand like a new oath. From invisible chambermaid to respected vice president, Jasmine Carter proved that dignity is not a luxury. It is a right. Months after the revelation, the Empire Grand Hotel was no longer the same. The luxurious walls still reflected the brilliance of the past, but now they also held stories of transformation. Invisible employees had achieved positions that previously seemed unattainable. Jasmine walked the halls with the same serenity as always, but her presence carried a different weight. She was no longer seen as a chambermaid, but as a leader who brought justice. The hotel not only prospered financially, but also regained its honor. Jasmine's journey had become an inspiration both inside and outside the hotel. Newspaper articles told her story, lectures were scheduled, and other sectors of the industry began to adopt similar programs. The lesson was clear. Talent has no color, uniform, or defined position. Prejudice can delay lives, but never extinguish gifts. The emotional looks on her former colleagues' faces proved that Jasmine's greatest victory was not the position, but the rekindled hope in everyone who still felt invisible. True justice isn't just about punishing those who discriminate, but about rebuilding systems so that prejudice has nowhere to hide. Jasmine Carter has shown that courage, talent, and dignity can transform humiliation into triumph. The voice softens, inviting the audience. If this story inspired you, subscribe to the channel for more stories about how invisible talents turn injustice into victory.